If you're a comic artist out there that's looking to level up your storytelling and just essentially master your craft, in this video I'm going to show you 4 books that every artist needs to do just that. Real quick, if you're new to the channel, I'm DJ. I've been a professional cartoonist for over 25 years now. I just love sharing everything that I learn along my journey, and that's why I founded the Draw or Die company, to help artists out there stay inspired and encouraged, and to just talk about things like this. So if you dig that type of content, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit that reminder bell. Now let's dive into looking at these 4 books that are going to make you a better storyteller, guaranteed. First, the funny thing about these books is even if you have them or you know them, it seems like every time you pick them up, you learn something new, or something that you took for granted or just didn't understand before. Or years later, something you might not have understood before becomes very incredibly clear to you now. So book number 1 that every comic creator should own is Comics in Sequential Art by Will Eisner. And let's take a look at why. Now, if you don't know who Will Eisner is, he's pretty much universally known as one of the great masters of comic storytelling. The major awards like the Oscars for comics is named after him, the Eisner Awards. He was one of the first real masters of the comic craft to really start talking about the power of sequential art and how you didn't need all the bells and whistles, or that it didn't need to be movies or animated, that the power of comics really came from the craft, the panel-to-panel storytelling, the sequential art. He coined the phrase sequential art. And this book in particular is based on a popular course that he taught at New York School of Visual Arts. So I like to think of it sort of like a crash course for everything visual storytelling, and it dives pretty deep, deep enough, into pretty much every fundamental of visual storytelling. From the timing in your panels, the layouts, the compositions, expressive anatomy, pretty much covers it all. But the real magic of Eisner's work, that he was able to express emotion and convey those emotions through panels and pages across his stories. And he shows you all of his thinkings and theories all right here in this 160-page book. If you could only buy one book today to help you increase your comic storytelling, I would suggest this book. It definitely covers a lot of the fundamentals of the comic and storytelling, and I just think it's a must-have for every comic artist's shelf. The next 3 books of the 4 that are going to make you a better comic storyteller are actually written by the same guy, and I'm going to show you the order to read them in. We're going to start with Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. The really genius thing about what Scott's doing with his books is he's actually using the art form itself to teach you about the art form itself. Scott was way ahead of his time in many regards, so we'll get into that in a second, but let's dig right into the first book, Understanding Comics. And this is really the one that you should start with first. Now, Understanding Comics is used in a lot of college classrooms and film schools and things like that, as a way to convey how visual storytelling works in our own minds. It really dives deep into the craft of how we see icons and symbols, and just how we perceive the world visually as human beings. Scott dives really deep into the history of sequential art, going all the way back to the cavemen and Egyptians. It's pretty awesome. His passion for the topic just really shines through on almost every page, and I promise you that after you read this and really absorb it, you're never going to approach a comic page the same way again. For example, for me, there was this one section where he talks about craft and how a lot of the stuff is on the surface that we learn, the shiny, the explosions, things like that. And I realized immediately that up until this point, that's what I had been learning with comics. Like, I was learning from a lot of the comics in the 90s, but I wasn't looking at the comics that had a deep core to them, something below the surface, right? I was just learning how to draw stuff that captures attention on the surface. Splash pages, breaking the panels, breaking all the rules, action, explosions. And there are good comics like that, don't get me wrong. But if you want your stories to be better, if you want to go from good to great, your stories have to go deeper. And that's what Scott's talking about in this book. They have to connect with the reader in some way that sticks with them forever. And again, the whole section of this book stuck with me forever. So it's a comic about comics that is stuck inside of me. And heck, I still use that metaphor for the apple and the shiny surface when I'm talking in my day job to marketing, or talking to other creators or busy YouTubers and talking about their brand strategies and things like that. Because oftentimes they work on the surface, but they don't have anything underneath. And that can kind of lead to burnout and just kind of fading out, burning out, right? Another standout moment in this book for me was when he talks about timing in comics, how the gutters themselves can convey time, even the length of the gutters between things, and how you can strategically have something happening off camera, or even better, whatever's happening in between the panels is happening in the reader's mind, which makes them a participant in the story in some way. That's that deeper bond, that deeper connection that you can have with your reader. How the reader kind of becomes a witness to your story, if you will. Pretty powerful stuff. So understanding comics is going to deliver on just that. You're going to understand more about comics than you've ever thought about in your entire life, I'm sure. And actually, every time I pick this book up, even now, I find myself learning something or understanding something a lot more since I've been working in comics for a while. And this is why it needs to be on the bookshelf of every serious comic artist, web cartoonist, web comic artist, webtoonist, whatever you're calling yourself these days. The next book up from Scott McCloud was about reinventing comics. In fact, it's called Reinventing Comics. And here's why this book is so important. This book came out in 2000. That was 23 years ago as of this video, if you're doing the math. And I kind of feel like back then it was a little bit overlooked. People who really dug understanding comics were really having a hard time wrapping their brains around all these new concepts. And they're concepts that we all know and love today. He was kind of predicting the future, way ahead of his time. Suddenly, McCloud is talking about 12 different ways that comics can expand themselves into the future and kind of grow out of that apathy and status quo that had stagnated for almost 100 years, mainly in American comics. He talks about how the future of comics won't come from the top down, it's going to come from the roots up. All the little good ideas out there are what's going to create the future of comics. He's the one that coined the phrase infinite canvas, and he had been experimenting with this a couple years before actually publishing this book. The scroll down comics, the scroll around comics, the things that you call webtoons now, Scott was pioneering that in the late 90s, early 2000s, way before anyone else. He definitely had the vision to see where comics could go. He dives into the fears and feelings of a lot of the traditional comic artists and readers thinking like, is it a comic if you can't touch it? And will comics lose their magic if you can't hold them? And he really makes a good case for print just being dead paper, dead slabs of trees. That the magic of comics is really about the storytelling between the creator and the reader. And he leans into the fact that you'll no longer need all of those middlemen to create your comics. You can do it all yourself, creator to reader, direct to consumer, D2C. And a lot of what he's talking about in this book is what's going on right now. Oh, and he talks about the idea of micropayments. So subscription models, micropayments, all of that back then seemed very hard to do, or not everyone felt comfortable paying for things online back then. No one trusts PayPal. Maybe that's still accurate. I don't know. Like I said, it was the year 2000. I think that it made a lot of people incredibly nervous, especially publishers and all the gatekeepers and middlemen. And traditional artists suddenly trying to wrap their brains around infinite canvas or digital art, it just seemed so overwhelming and just very expensive. And one thing I think that doesn't get mentioned enough in this book, he actually touches on it a little, is that comics have the power to have so much more potential for diversity and culture and inclusion within comics. Not only in the pages, but by the creators themselves. You could be from anywhere in the world with just simple tools and tell your stories from wherever you are in life. More women, more people of color, more cultures and diversity can tell their stories through this medium. And by using the internet, you can reach a whole new global audience. For me, I feel like reading Reinventing Comics back then in 2000 gave me a reaffirmation that what I was doing, the path I was on, webcomics, was actually a good thing, when many traditional artists were kind of like crapping on it at the time. Giving comics away for free online, you're destroying the entire boat, guy. And, maybe in many ways there's some of that still exists today. McCloud's Reinventing Comics really foretold everything that we have today, and there are hints of what could come even further in the future if we just kind of can get out of our own way. But in the end, it really comes down to the craft. The delivery system between creator and reader really doesn't matter, whether it's in print, digital, on a screen. It's all about the craft. And that leads us to the last book that he wrote, Making Comics. Making Comics is a comprehensive guide for comic artists to create their own comics from start to finish. Even a little bit of the business of comics. I think what really sets this book apart is McCloud's approach to teaching, which is very accessible and engaging for artists of all levels. And again, he's using sequential art to teach you sequential art. It's incredible. I do feel like in the Making Comics book, McCloud took everything that he loved from the comics and sequential art from Eisner everything that he wanted to learn more about, and he put it into this book. And it really goes 10 miles deeper on the craft, the business of comics, even down to the tools that one might choose to work with. It really is kind of like a college book for teaching comics storytelling. You know, just pulling these books off the shelf after years of not looking at them for this video, I really do kind of feel like it energizes me. It really makes me feel confident in saying that I think that these books will actually make you a better storyteller now and in the future. Every time I pick them up, I feel like I'm relearning something. Do you have these books already? Have you read them? Post your favorite parts in the comments. And if there are other books that you suggest for creators to learn better storytelling, please post those as well. I hope you stay encouraged out there. I hope these videos inspire you to go create something new. And I can't wait to see what you come up with. See you soon.